Good morning, everyone. Welcome to FCC. We are so glad that you are here today. My name is Kelsey, and I have the opportunity to serve here on the music team here at FCC. And I wanted to take a minute just before we get started to talk about why we start our services by singing together. There's a lot of reasons why we sing, and a lot of themes of the songs that we sing. For some of us who may be new to this community or any faith-based community, this can kind of feel like an uncomfortable moment. You don't know the words to the songs. You're not really sure if you should sing along or listen. And so I want to encourage you. This is a time for us as a community to sing together, to worship together, to lift up our God who has done so many remarkable things in our lives and in this world. To say, we find joy in you. We find joy in your presence, and we lift you up. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for everything that you do in our lives. So as we start our service today, I want to invite you to join in with our community and sing together with us. Here we go.
Let's put our hands together.
The God who is, we worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison door, he parted the raging sea. My God, he holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord, there's joy in the house of the Lord today, and we won't be quiet, we'll shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord, our Lord is give you glory for all that you brought me through. And now I'm ready for whatever you're gonna do. I'm moving forward to follow after you. And now I'm ready for whatever you wanna do. Now I'm ready for whatever you wanna do. Sing your presence. 'Cause your presence is an open door. We come to you, Lord, like never before. Yes. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. In every season, your grace has been enough, and I believe, now I'm believing, the best is yet to come. The cross before me, my hope on things above, and in you, Jesus, the best is yet to come. Your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. Let's put our hands together. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. It won't stop now. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. It won't stop now. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and it won't stop now. We worship you,
Would y'all go ahead and grab a seat? First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for hanging out with us. My name is Scott. If you don't know me, I'm one of the pastors here. And I just want to take a minute to give us an update on this thing that we call generations. And if you've been around, you know what that's about. And if not, you're like, I don't know what that's about, but that's okay. Because I'm going to kind of explain a little bit of what it's all about right now. Our church, FCC, is like almost 30 years old. And so we have a long history, and it's full of a lot of great moments, and it's full of some struggles. And if you go back to the mid-'80s, when we first built this auditorium, our church went in debt about $5 million. And debt within churches is not an uncommon thing. In fact, it's a fairly common thing. But the kind of significance of debt within churches varies from church to church. In our church's history, debt has been a major obstacle. When we went in debt in the 80s, we did not have enough to pay that debt. At one time, 60% of our budget was going toward debt service. The church should have closed, but by the grace of God and by the generosity of a whole lot of people, we managed to survive and to go through that. And over the next 25 years, the amount of our debt kind of went up and down. Sometimes we pay some of it off, then sometimes we take more out. For example, when we redid the whole campus a while back, we took out more debt. We had a campaign at one point around the year 2000 to lower debt a little bit. When we moved our school, Huntington Christian School, we took out a little more debt, so it kind of ebbed and flowed. About 10 years ago, we really started praying about, hey, God, how do we get rid of this historical burden of debt? Because what we recognized is that for the health and the long-term viability of the church moving forward, we could not hand the debt load that we had off to future generations. A lot of us lived in this reality where, hey, the economy is always up and to the right, and you just always assume things were going to go up, but the economy was a lot more uncertain, and so we knew, hey, what's at stake here is, again, the health and long-term viability of the church. So how do we begin to get rid of this so we can hand off a healthier church to future generations? So at that time, it was just praying and thinking, but then about 2 years ago, we really felt like God was leading us hey, go ahead and take the first step toward getting rid of this. And so at that time, we were $6.5 million in debt, and we knew that we were going to have to refinance our debt in September of 2023. And so what we felt like was, man, if we could eliminate half our debt over the next 2 years, so when we refinance, we only owe $3 million, then that would be a huge step forward. And so we started at that point an initiative that we called Generations, that was about erasing half of our debt, which was going to be our first step toward a healthier, thriving church for the long term. And it was the worst time in the history of the world to start it because it was COVID and some people hadn't come back yet and we weren't really gathered. It was crazy, it was chaotic, but we really felt hey, God is leading us to do this, so let's do it. So we did it, and people started to give generously, and it was incredible, and the numbers started to go down, and it was absolutely awesome. I was overwhelmed. And then in the middle of all that, we got a call that someone wanted to give $5 million toward our debt and toward special projects. Which when that happened, I remember just crying on the phone and thinking this is incredible because it's a game changer. Because now we're not just talking about cutting the debt in half, we're talking about eliminating the debt. And so that kind of changed everything. And so now where we sit, our debt is currently only $110,000, which is an absolute miracle. Yeah, it's a miracle. It really is. And that is possible because of so many people and so many of you, so many of us who've given sacrificially and generously. And we will now pay off our debt sometime right around the end of this calendar year. So here in just a couple months. And I'm telling you this just so you know, you don't have to remember this. We'll put it out there more. But on January 8th, 2023, we're going to have a big debt payoff celebration. That weekend, it's a Sunday, we're going to get together, we're going to celebrate what God has done, what God is doing. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll let you know more about that, but that's going to be a cool way for us to kick off 2023. And so it's exciting. It really is kind of a cool thing. And I say this first of all because I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for giving to help us shed this burden that we've been with for about 40 years. And debt is, and you know this in your life if you're in debt at all, debt is this burden. It's this thing that you carry. But one of the things we understood about paying off our debt was that the whole goal, the whole point was never just to pay off debt. That wasn't just the goal, that we had a bigger goal, that the church, not just our church, but the church exists as God's missional entity into the world, that God is on a mission to save and restore his creation, and the church is his people that God has put in. So we exist as a church to be a part, to participate in the transformation of our community. And one of the things that this is going to be me venting for a second. One of the things I get tired of is, I don't know if this is true for you, but I have friends that live in other parts of the country, and sometimes they go on social media and they'll post derogatory things about California. California has a bad rap. Oh, California this, oh, California that, oh, we should get rid of California, we should sell California. And every time I see something like that, I think, you're just jealous because where you live sucks. You have awful weather and it's a disaster. You're just jealous because we live in the best place in the country to live, and so forget you. This really is, as bad of a rap as California may get, this is really the best place to live. And we exist as a church because we love this place. We love this community, we love SoCal, and we exist to be a part of the transformation of our community and of all of SoCal. And that's what we want to do. That's the goal. Getting rid of debt is helping us to be able to focus more on that. Our debt never prevented us from being a part of that, but it was a hindrance. It was kind of an obstacle that we had to work through. And now that we can shed that, we can kind of focus everything in on, hey, this is why we exist. This is why God has placed us here. This is what we're all about. And our story with debt, especially through the last years, has been incredible because when you look at what's happened in our culture and our society, specifically as it relates to churches, it's been a chaotic couple of years. It's been a chaotic couple of years for all of us. But as someone who works in the church world, when you look at what the last couple of years has done to church, it's chaos. I mean, most churches in our country, their attendance has dropped between 30 and 50%, and we're no different. And that's happened for various reasons. You had some people that got upset at churches for their social policies or politics or whatever, and they left. But you had a lot of people really who just kind of got out of the habit of going. David Kinnaman, who's the president of Barna, he talks about resilient disciples. And resilient disciples are people who, they're committed to Jesus and their faith makes a difference in their everyday life. And what Kinnaman notes in Barna's research is that the number of resilient disciples hasn't changed. Those people who are committed to Jesus and Jesus impacts their everyday life, that's the same as it was 2-3 years ago. But what has happened is you had a whole bunch of people who would go to church because that's just what they did. It was their habit or whatever, but it didn't have any impact on their life. He referred to them as consumer Christians, that's who stopped going because they just got out of the habit of going and realized it didn't make an impact in their life, and so they quit going. Numbers in church attendance in our country have been declining for decades, but it's taken a sharp drop over the last 2 years. And so churches have kind of been in chaos trying to figure out what do we do, and again, it's been no different for us. We've experienced the same thing as everyone across the country has experienced. But in the midst of all that, God has also been doing this incredible thing of helping us to erase our debt and helping us to get to a place where, we can kind of boldly move into the future. And so it's exciting, but there's also still these challenges of how do we navigate this? What does it look like for us to become a church in the new world and the new reality in which we live? And so with all the great things that God has been doing with this great story, there's still all these challenges. We have to understand that we're not the church that we used to be. We used to be a church about 2,000. Now we're a church of closer to about 12 or 1,300. And so that impacts certain things. That impacts the number of volunteers that serve in our children's ministry, our youth ministry, or our food pantry, all these other things. It impacts giving. Our giving is down about 20% this year from what it was last year. And so sometimes it's easy to look at that and go, oh, this is down, this is depressing. But it's not all depressing because as much as some of those numbers may be down, our attendance is actually up 30% from what it was a year ago and even just a few months ago. Our number of first-time visitors is way up. And so we're engaging a lot of people and a lot of new people, and things are growing. It's exciting, but it's still challenges. They're forcing us to rethink, what do we do? How do we think differently? How do we function differently? We're not who we used to be, but it really, in a lot of ways, that's good. I mean, when you look at the story of the Bible, there's always these moments where, in the Old Testament, which is the story of Israel, where Israel's turned upside down and there's nothing but chaos. Or even in the New Testament, the church, there's these moments of chaos where everything's turned upside down. But what you learn is, but that's when God does new things, and that's when God does his best work. And it's not things that we would have wanted. It's not things that we would have planned for. But man, God is doing something new. And so we really believe in the midst of all this chaos that God is doing new things and God is bringing things to life. And we want to participate in that because we exist to participate in the transformation of our community and of all of SoCal. But how do we think different? How do we act different? Because we're not who we used to be. And what we've seen in generations is the difference that we can all make when we come together. We had this 40-year burden of debt that literally almost killed our church, but we were able to come together in the midst of the most chaotic times in our culture in order to overcome this obstacle. And so as we draw near to the end of generations, I want to say a couple things. One, I want to encourage those of us who've made commitments, let's finish this thing strong. We've got these couple months to go in the end of the year. Let's finish these things strong. And even if you haven't made a commitment, if you want to give, you can give online, FCCHB.com. You can give directly toward that to help us finish that off strong. But I also want us to begin to think about what does life look like for us as a church after generations closes, when we get into the new year. And all of a sudden, this 40-year obstacle is gone. And yeah, we came together to overcome that. But how do we stay together? Because the only way we continue to participate in the transformation of our community is by coming together. When we make commitments to the church, commitments aren't to an institution, they're to one another. The word church in the New Testament actually means gathering. It's assembly. It's the people. What we do when we serve, when we give, when we do all these things, it's not about the institution. It's about, hey, this is what happens when we come together. When we sacrifice together, when we give the best of what we are together. This is the impact that we can make. And so as we're kind of drawing to the end of generations, here's the thing that I want us all to think about. I'm going to put this up on the screen. I want you to think and pray about your giving and your involvement at FCC. I'm not going to ask you to make a commitment. I'm not going to ask you to sign this thing, to do all that. But I want us to all think. Because the only way we're ever going to participate in the transformation of our community and of all of SoCal is if we come together. Is if we're willing to spend our time, our talent, our treasure, and pool those things together to make the greatest impact that we can here locally, and ultimately that kind of spreads to around the world. And so what I would hope for each one of us is that as we think about, hey, serving or volunteering or giving, is that we do it thoughtfully and prayerfully. That it's not just random, it's not an afterthought, but we've actually sat down ourselves or with our spouses or our loved ones or our friends and thought through, man, what can I give to help us realize this vision of a transformed community and a transformed SoCal? Because that's why we exist. And the power of the church is that we do it together. See, a lot of times we make faith individual. Right? Faith is about me and my relationship with God, and faith is about what God is doing in my life. And I'm not taking away from individual aspects of that is true. But nowhere in the biblical story does God ever imagine faith as a strictly individual thing. There's always a community. It's always about us. And all this stuff that we tend to make individual is actually about us. Generations was successful because of us. This church has a successful history because of us. This church will have a successful future because of us. And we only work when we all come together. So what does it look like for us? How do we continue to come together, even as generations draw us to a close, for the sake of the thriving of the community in which we live and the area in which we live? You know, there's something that we do every week as a church. We celebrate communion. And when you came in, you may have picked up one of the little cups with a little bread. If you have it, take it out. If you don't have one and you want to participate, just raise your hand, because we have some people that have some and they'll gladly deliver one to you. You don't have to take a part in this, so if you don't want to, you don't have to. But if you want to, just raise your hand. But I grew up going to church, and we would celebrate communion at my church. And when I was growing up, communion was this individual thing, like we talked about. Like a lot of faith is individual. And when we talk about communion in my church, it was like, hey, think about your sin and what you've done and how much God loves you. And again, I'm not taking away from that, but one of the things I learned as I grew up is that when Jesus first celebrated communion with his followers, it wasn't individual, it was communal. That it was actually it was a holiday celebration, a Passover celebration. And holiday meals are things you celebrate with family. So the fact that Jesus was celebrating this with a group of people shows that like he was creating a new family is what he was doing. And when he got them together to celebrate communion, he was telling them, yeah, this is to celebrate what I'm doing, but it's what I'm doing for all of you. And Jesus' death and resurrection is about bringing us together. That's the language Paul uses. Paul says, through Jesus, we are becoming one. And so when we celebrate communion, communion isn't just about me. Communion is about us. And the church, the family, the congregation, whatever word you want to use, that God is building in among us as we come together as his people. So if you want to peel back the top layer, a little clear piece of plastic that has the bread. On that Passover, Jesus took the bread and he said, this is my body that's being broken for you. And so we take it to remember Jesus and his sacrifice, and that he willingly gave his life. He said, no one took it from me. I give it willingly. So we eat that bread. And if you want to peel back the silver part that has the juice in it, Jesus took the drink and he said, I want you to drink this, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but he said, I want you to drink this to remember my blood. In the Old Testament, when you would make sacrifices, the blood was the life of the animal. And so it was symbolic of life. And so we drink this to remember, one, that Jesus gave his life, but it's his giving his life that gives us life. That gives us life, yes, individually, but it also gives us life collectively as a community. That it's through Jesus' sacrifice that he's bringing us together, his people. Let's go ahead and drink that. And we take communion to remember what it is that Jesus has done for us, but also to celebrate that it is through what he's done for us that he's bringing us together as a community, as his people, as a family, as a church. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for your love for us. I thank you that you came down and gave your life to overcome sin and death, and to make a new way, and to make a new world, and to make a new people. And God, I thank you for the privilege that I have of being a part of this community and of this church. And God, I pray that as we continue to move forward, that you will continue to bring us together, that we will continue to take steps closer and closer to one another in a world that's constantly being fragmented and torn apart. God, I pray that we would be a community that draws near to one another and draws near to you. Father, we love you, we thank you, we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I'm pulling on joy from heaven's reserve. You stored up enough for every winter I'm served. I'm seeing beyond my circumstance. This joy that I have is my inheritance joy. This is the joy of the Lord. Sing this with me. So the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. Oh, he is my hope. The joy of the Lord is my strength.
There is a Savior in the valley place. He's walking beside me and he knows my pain. God, the beginning and the end. God, right there in the midst of it. Joy. This is the joy of the Lord. Say joy. Joy.
God, thank you so much for just being here, God, being in our presence, allowing us to be in your presence, God. We love you so much, and we're so thankful for this opportunity to learn about you more, God, to sing songs to you, God, and to learn who you are in our lives, God. We love you so much, and we're so thankful for everything that you've done for us, God. We love you. And everybody said, amen. You can have a seat.
In Jesus' public life, there's a lot of actions and things that he does that he kind of gets reputations for. Like, oh, he's a healer and he's a miracle worker. But one of the things he's most known for is being a teacher. A lot of times he was called rabbi or teacher. And the New Testament is filled with all kinds of recorded teachings of Jesus. And most of those are kind of like a scaled down synopsis of what he said, but there's all these different teachings of Jesus. But the longest one, and in a lot of ways probably the most significant one, is called the Sermon on the Mount. And it's a teaching that Jesus gives. It's recorded in Matthew's account of Jesus' life, Matthew 5 through 7. And Jesus gives a Sermon on the Mount toward the beginning of his public life. And really it serves as kind of the manifesto of, hey, here's what I'm all about and here's what my movement is all about. And so we've been walking through the Sermon on the Mount, looking at what Jesus is saying, what he's announcing, what it means to be a part of this movement that he's starting that ultimately becomes known as the church. And so usually if you've been here the last few weeks, usually I'll start off, I'll give you kind of a little background and then, hey, this is what Jesus is talking about. But today we're just going to dive right in because I think what Jesus says today speaks for itself. And it's something that when we hear the word that he's talking about, I think it'll trigger emotions because we all kind of have, I think, strong opinions on this particular topic. Here's what Jesus says. Matthew 7, 1 through 2. Do not judge or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And so Jesus kind of dives right in at this point and talks about judgment. And judgment is one of those things that I think we all hate because at some point in our life, we have all felt judged for something. Now, an interesting side note for those of you that are literature scholars, this is actually the verse from where Shakespeare takes the title for his play, Measure for Measure. And what's interesting is if you know anything about the plot of Measure to Measure, which you don't have to, but the whole play of Measure to Measure is really a commentary on this verse. Because what Jesus is saying here is, hey, be careful how you criticize and judge other people because it's going to come back to haunt you, which is the whole point of Measure for Measure. It's a commentary on exactly this. That Jesus is saying, hey, don't judge. Don't judge. And again, like I said, I think we've all felt judged at some point for something. See, judgment is when someone is critical of something about us and their response to us, whether verbal or nonverbal, makes us feel like we're less. And there's a lot of things we all feel judged for. A lot of things. Here's just some statistics on things that people feel judged for. 90% of parents in our country, this is they feel judged as parents. Like they're not good enough. That other people, when they see them with their parents, do something that shows their disapproval. You're not good enough. You're not raising your child right. I did it better than you, whatever. 69% of people say they feel judged for their snacking habits, most specifically from their significant other, their husband, their wife, their boyfriend or girlfriend. Now, don't raise your hand and don't point at one another. These are just, it's not about you. These are just kind of the generic statistics. 72% of shoppers admit to feeling judged for things that they buy. So for example, when they walk around either the grocery store or Target and they have a cart full of something, they feel judged by other people for what's in their cart. So much so that a vast majority of people in the same survey said they would rather buy something online for more money than go to the store and put it in their cart because they don't want to feel judged by the other people in the store for, oh, look what they're buying. And let me just tell you from my experience as a pastor who lives and shops within the community in which I work at a church, yes, absolutely. I've talked about this before, but I don't drink all the time alcohol. I mean, I drink water all the time, but I don't drink alcohol all the time. But I do drink alcohol sometimes. I'll have a beer sometimes, or I'll have an old fashioned or something. And so occasionally, when I go to the store, I will buy, I'll put a 6-pack of beer in my cart, or I'll put a bottle of whiskey, because you have to buy it, right? And every time I do, which is not very often, but whenever I do, if I'm in the grocery store and I have alcohol in my cart, and there's someone from church who's like, hey, Pastor Scott, how you doing? I will just dive in front of it. Don't look at my cart. Nothing to hide here. How you doing? God bless you. Let me say a prayer and you go on your way. Because I just don't want people to see. I don't want you to go home and post, Pastor Scott was buying alcohol, it's a slippery slope. You know where that goes. So I get it. We do. We feel judged by other people for the things that we buy. 40% of people say that they feel judged for their body type. And I know we kind of laugh about some of these and everything, but this one gets heartbreaking because you see in this, like, when you feel judged for your body type, that leads to all different kinds of unhealthy, sometimes really unhealthy behaviors. Because it impacts the way we think about ourselves, and then this leads to things like eating disorders that just mess us up. Because here's the thing about feeling judged, and this is true of all of these. The thing about feeling judged is when you feel judged, that puts all kinds of like negative connotations on you about yourself, and you become to be more self-critical. So when people communicate their disapproval of you, you begin to be more self-critical of yourself, and maybe I am a bad parent. Maybe I do have bad eating habits. Maybe I am buying horrible things. I'm a terrible person. Maybe my body type isn't good enough. And that leads to stress and depression and all kinds of unhealthy habits that literally can destroy us as people, and they can destroy our relationships. See, the thing about judgment is incredibly toxic. When we feel judged, it just eats us apart and and this is what Jesus is getting. Jesus is saying, don't do it. Don't do it because it's not at all helpful. All judgment does is destroy other people. Now, before we go any further, I do need to make a distinction, and this is important distinction. There is a difference between being a dirtbag and judging someone. And you can substitute a different word in here, jerk, idiot, some other words that you probably shouldn't say in church, but there's a difference. There's a big difference. Okay, because there's something about judgment. Like being a dirtbag is just being critical and being a jerk and being mean, which is bad. It is bad. And judging people is rooted in that. Yes, when you judge people, you are mean, you are critical. But there's this essential element in judgment that takes being a dirtbag to a whole new level. And I would argue this is what makes it so painful. And I would even use the word dehumanizing. That when you move on and you're moving past being a jerk and past being a dirtbag, and now you're judging, now you're actually dehumanizing someone. And let me explain what that kind of essential element is. When you talk about the word judgment, I think most of us know this, judgment is a legal term. It comes from a courtroom setting. Right? And in a courtroom setting, what you're doing when you judge is you're making a decision based on evidence. Whether you're the judge or the jury, you're sitting there, all this evidence is presented to you, and based on the evidence that you see or hear, you are making a decision about this situation. Now, the reality is, all of us make hundreds of decisions every day. A lot of times we even make those decisions at like a subconscious level. There is a corporate image consultant and personal brand strategist named Anna Hinson. And she says that within the first 7 seconds of meeting someone, we make 11 decisions about them. 11. And there are things like their intelligence, their socioeconomic status, their education, their competence, their trustworthiness. And those decisions could be positive or negative. But within the first 7 seconds of meeting someone, and again, I don't think this happens consciously. We don't sit there and go, oh, this. It happens at a subconscious level that based on the way someone looks, the way someone talks, maybe the things that they say, we instantly make all of these decisions about, again, a lot of the things she said and probably even more, how smart this person is, how intelligent they are they rich, are they poor, are they educated, are they uneducated, can I trust them, can I not trust them? And we make hundreds of these decisions every single day. And what happens is those decisions often get communicated to other people, sometimes in verbal, sometimes in nonverbal ways. Sometimes they may be direct and they're things that we say to them. Sometimes it's just the way that we treat them. If we judge someone to be less than us, maybe we think, oh, this person's poor, uneducated, or stupid. We may not directly say anything mean, but we don't pay attention, we roll our eyes, our body language just communicates that, you know what, you're not worth my time. And so we end up communicating these decisions that we make to other people. Now, sometimes that communication is direct. Sometimes we can just say things. Some of us are blunt and mean. Some of us are far more passive-aggressive. Some of us are sarcastic. But however we do it, we end up making these decisions about people that we then communicate to the other person, verbally or non-verbally. And when we receive those communications, we realize, hey, I've been rejected by this person. This person thinks I'm less than them. This person thinks I'm not good enough. This person thinks I'm dumb or stupid or poor or whatever it is. And that's when it hurts. Because deep down, we all want to be validated and accepted. We do. We want other people to look at us and say, yes, whatever's wrong with you, I still accept you. You're still a human being. I still care about you. I love you, and you matter, and you're important. We all want to feel that. So whenever, even if someone's decision about us is made at a subconscious level, whenever someone communicates disapproval of us in any way, it hurts. It hurts because we feel rejected, and we feel like somehow we're less than them. But remember, remember, judgment is more than just that. Because go back to the courtroom scene. Judgment, you're not just making a decision, you're also providing a remedy. Because over the course of a court case, you're going to listen to evidence. And based on that evidence, you're going to make a judgment. You're going to say guilty or innocent, right or wrong. And if you deem the situation to be wrong, that, hey, something bad happened here, this person's guilty, whatever it is, then you're not just deeming the situation to be wrong and broken and messed up, but you're also saying, and here's how we make it right. We make it right by this person has to go to jail, or this person has to pay this person this amount of money, or whatever the sentence is. Because when you talk about judgment, in a courtroom setting, which is where the term comes from, it includes all those things. It's making a decision about a situation and also providing the remedy for, and here's how we make it right. Now, I think most of us understand you can never really make it fully right. But the whole point of a judge, when the judge issues the sentence, is, hey, this situation's wrong, broken, it's messed up, and so to the best that we can, here's how we're going to make it right moving forward. And so this, going back to our whole thing, this is when you separate judgment from dirtbag. Okay, dirtbag is someone who's just mean and critical. But judgment then becomes, not only am I mean and critical, but I'm going to tell you what you need to do to fix yourself. Because in my superiority, I'm better than you, and you're the one that's jacked up, and you're the one that's messed up, and so here's what you need to do, because if you do this, you'd be more like me, and then you'd be better. So with judgment, there's this like arrogance that comes with it that recognizes, yes, you are broken, and you are messed up, and here's what you need to do to fix. You just need to listen to me. See, the reason why judgment, why I use the word dehumanizing, why it's so dehumanizing, is because what judgment does is it objectifies people. It turns people into something that I am going to fix. That you're broken and you're wrong, and me being so much better than you, I can just tell you what to do to fix it. And the reason why judgment hurts so bad is usually when someone tells you what you need to do to fix it, they're not offering to help. They're just telling you. Hey, you're jacked up, do this, you'll be more like me, and then you'll be better. About 7 months after I became the lead pastor here at FCC, my son was diagnosed with autism. I've talked about this before if you've been around, but Jeremy is what you would classify as like high-functioning autism. And so even in school, he's in like regular school, he's in regular class, but there's still things that are difficult for him that are probably easy for a lot of us. And he has behaviors that fall on what they call the autism spectrum. And when he was younger, one of those behaviors that frequently popped up was he would have meltdowns. And the reason that he would have meltdowns is because, again, the way his brain was wired, he lacked a lot of the coping skills a lot of us have. So when things didn't go the way he thought they should go, it wasn't even necessarily the way he wanted them to go. It's, hey, this is how it should go. When it doesn't go that way, the way his brain's wired, he didn't have the coping skills to be able to adjust. And so the way he would respond was to melt down. And a lot of times that behavior would happen in public. And when it happened in public, people often voiced or sometimes just showed their disapproval. They would, and my wife and I felt that. We would feel critical. We would feel judged, like we weren't parents, we weren't doing enough. But what was even more painful than that is you would have people who would give you pieces of advice. Here's what you need to do to fix it. Here's what we did with my kid. Here's what's wrong with parents these days. You parents do this. You parents that you should do this. You should do that. You should do this. And that was even more hurtful. It was, because it's like, if you've ever been in that place, you're sitting there thinking like, do you think I'm not trying everything? Do you think I'm just sitting here like, oh, well, this is cool. This is what we want for our family to be like. I want my kid to melt down in the middle of stores or in the middle of the church campus. This is what I'm after. This is the behavior. Like, we were a young family that was just trying to kind of figure things out. And you all know this, like, as people, we're different. We come from different situations. And so what works beautifully here may not work here. And so when all you do is drop in and, hey, you're doing it wrong, you're jacked up, do this and everything will be great, and then you leave, it is incredibly hurtful. Because you're sitting there as a person thinking, I am trying. Go back to all those things we feel judged for. All those, you think I don't want to be a good parent? You think I don't want to have a good family? You think I don't want to have good eating habits? You think I don't want, you think I don't want to be a better person? You think I don't recognize what's wrong and what's broken? You think I don't want to be the kind of person that I really want to be? And then you come and you drop this on me and you just tell me how you're better than me and I'm jacked up and I'm less than. That's why it leaves us like feeling like we're so much less than other people. That's why it's so demoralizing, because it makes us feel less than human. because you're so much better. And if I was just like you, then everything would be great. See, that's what judgment communicates. Because again, the thing about judgment is when people pass judgment, they're never actually offering to help you. Hey, here's what you're doing wrong. Let me help you. No, hey, here's what you're doing wrong. Fix this. Again, go back to the courtroom scene. Judges and juries, they sit through a case. They pronounce a judgment. They give the sentence. And then what do? They leave. They go on. And I'm not knocking judges and juries. That's what they're supposed to do. They go on. You make the judgment, you pass the sentence, and then you leave. You're not part of the solution. You're not a part of, this person's probation or rehabilitation or whatever it is. And so that's the thing about judgment. We show up into someone's life. We make all these decisions about them that they're not good enough. They're not this. We drop the bomb of, hey, you're broken. You need to fix it. Peace, I'm out of here. Good luck. And we leave this person with this just criticism that we've heaped on them, and also this pressure of look how much better we are. And it just leaves just brokenness and hurt and pain. And that's why it is so dehumanizing, which is exactly why Jesus says, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't try to fix all of these people. It's not your job to fix people. And see, that's I think sometimes the part of judgment that we really miss is we tend to think of all judgment as bad. Like judgment just in general. You have to understand that when you look at the biblical story, again, the Old Testament is the first part of the Bible, tells the story of Israel. The New Testament tells the story of the church. In both the Old and the New Testament, judgment is an essential part of hope. It is. Without judgment, there is no hope. So it's not that judgment is bad. Remember what Jesus says. Talking to us as humans, we don't judge each other. It's not that all judgment is bad. It's that it's not our job. Our job is not to judge. And whenever we make it our job, we end up causing death and destruction in other people's lives because we're doing something that isn't ours to do. See, for the people of Israel and for the church, judgment was tied to hope because, again, go back to judgment. What is judgment? Judgment is looking at a situation and determining that it's broken, it's wrong, this was bad. Something bad happened here, and because something bad happened here, we are now going to make a decision to the best that we can to try to set it right. So ultimately, judgment is about taking a bad situation and trying to make it right. And so judgment was really the hope of the people of Israel and the church, because when you look at the biblical story begins in Genesis where God creates the world. And it's good, and there's order to it. And as long as creation operates within that order, there's harmony, and there's shalom, and there's peace. But as the story unfolds, that gets broken. And so the biblical witness, and I think most of us would agree with this, is that something is deeply wrong with the world. It's not the way that it should be. Something is broken, and it needs to be set right. And so the hope of Israel is that what is broken in creation will be set right. And when you get to the New Testament, the hope of the church is that what is broken in the world would be made right. But that requires judgment. That requires someone to say, hey, it's broken, here's what's broken, and now we're going to make it right. And the witness of both the people of Israel and of the church is that the only one who can rightly judge the world is God, because God is the creator of the world. And so for the people of Israel, their plea is, God, judge the world. God, judge the world. God, judge the world. And it's not in the sense to condemn it. It's no, we need you to save it because the only hope is that you will make this right. Now, sometimes in the Old Testament specifically, that hope for judgment will manifest itself in some pretty brutal, like Psalms especially. We'll have people that write Psalms that say, like, God, strike down my enemies and destroy them. And it sounds harsh, and you read that and go, man, this is brutal. But what I want you to understand is if you ever read those, that is rooted in this desire for hope, that it's this recognition that, God, this situation isn't right. What's happening in the world isn't right. What's happening in my life isn't right. It's broken. And what I want more than anything is I want you to make it right because you're the only one who can. Now, ultimately, that hope for judgment gets manifested in the person of Jesus. That God comes down to earth in the person of Jesus. And he comes down in order to make creation right. John 3:16 is like the most famous verse in the Bible. You don't really see it anymore, but when I was a kid, you used to see it at sporting events all the time. You'd have people painted on signs and hold up John 3:16. I haven't seen it much anymore, but that's like the most famous verse. It's a great verse, but the verse that comes after John 3:17 is actually, I think it's a cooler verse. I don't want to say better, cooler. Here's what it says though. This is Jesus talking. He says, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus says, this is why I came. I came to make this right. The creation is broken. It's not what God intended. It's not what it should be. I have entered into creation in order to save it, in order to make it right. And how am I going to do that? John 9:39. Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world. You know how I'm going to make the world right? I'm going to judge it. And that makes us nervous. But again, if you don't judge it, you can't overcome it. If you don't judge it, you can't make it right. And here's the thing I think sometimes we forget about Jesus. Sometimes we read these passages about judgment and it gives us a bad image of God. But here's what you got to remember, is when we think of judgment, we think of the person who passes judgment as sitting in the position of power. Because picture a courtroom in your mind. Where does the judge sit? The judge sits in the front, and the judge sits elevated above, looking down at everyone else, including the accused. And when the judge passes that judgment, they beat that gavel and they look down. But when Jesus passes judgment, it's completely reversed. Because Jesus doesn't pass judgment on the earth from the position of power. He passes judgment on the earth from the position of the accused. He's the criminal. He's put on trial. He's beat. He's tortured. He's ultimately crucified and murdered and buried. And in that, he absorbs the worst of the world. He absorbs what it is that's broken in the world. He takes death into himself, and then what does he do? He overcomes it. He conquers it. He raises from the dead. And you have hundreds of people that are like, hey, we saw him. He was dead, and then he rose from the dead. You have all these eyewitnesses. See, in his death, in this position of weakness, he judges everything to be wrong. He overcomes it, and then with his resurrection, he begins to make the world right. And so as much as Jesus talks about judgment, the way he goes about doing it is the polar opposite of what we think about. But it is still judgment. Because he is still deeming, hey, this situation on earth where life is ruled by death, this is broken. And how I'm going to make it right is I'm going to enter into it. I'm going to take the position of the accused. I'm going to suffer the powers of earth and hell, and I'm going to overcome that in order to make everything right. And with his resurrection, he begins to remake the world new. That's the witness of the New Testament. And so for Israel and for the church, judgment is essential to hope. Without it, we have no hope. And so judgment isn't bad, but it becomes bad when you and I choose to do it ourselves, because in judging other people, what we do is we put ourselves in a place that should only belong to God. Only God, as the creator and savior of the world, has the wisdom and love with which to judge the world. And what happens over and over again throughout the biblical story and throughout history is every time you and I put ourselves in a position that should only belong to God, we cause death and destruction. Every time. Every time we do something that only God is supposed to do, we bring death and destruction. And this is Jesus' point. Not that judgment is bad. Judgment is good because it leads to hope, but it's not our job. And so when we end up passing judgment, all we end up doing is bringing death and destruction to ourselves and to other people. So don't do it. Let God be God and let us be us. Don't judge. Now, here's where it starts to get really tricky and really messy. Jesus says don't judge, which again, remember what judgment is. Judgment is I'm going to make decisions about you and about how you're not good enough, and then I'm going to tell you how to fix them. That's judgment. Jesus says don't do that. But what Jesus doesn't mean is he doesn't mean that we should never have difficult conversations with each other about some of our lifestyle choices, about the things we're doing. See, some of us take judgment as like, well, Jesus just lets us do whatever we want. No. Jesus, not here nor anywhere, is he advocating for like a laissez-faire, you, do whatever you want attitude. He's never saying, hey, don't challenge each other. And you can tell that because he goes on, and this is what he says next after his warning not to judge. Here's what he says next. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So Jesus gives us this powerful image of how ugly judgment looks in real life and how hypocritical it is. And again, the image he gives is basically there's like a tree growing out of our eye, and there's a speck of sawdust in someone else's eye, and we're just ignoring this thing that, here, let me help you pull this out. And again, I think it's a perfect image because that's what judgment looks like. Isn't it when someone's judging you, isn't that what you feel like? Like, okay, I'm not perfect. I know I'm broken. I know I'm messed up. But look at you. You're more jacked up than I am. And so it's this image. But notice what Jesus says here. First, take the plank out of your own, then you can help them. So he's not saying, don't worry about the speck in their eye. He's not saying, hey, never address the speck in someone else's life. He's just saying that before you do, you need to own up to what it is in your life. So Jesus' point here isn't never confront each other on difficult situations. Jesus operates, his whole life is lived as if there is something as morality. There is right and wrong. There is good and bad. Jesus also expects, to a certain extent, his movement to have influence on the world around them. But he wants them to do it in the right way and with the right attitude. And so the picture he gets is like, look, if you're going to try to fix someone else without owning up to the issues in your own life, it just looks bad. I remember when my wife was pregnant with Jeremy, and it was getting to the time where he was going to be born. Her doctor, who'd been her doctor through the whole thing, he ended up like breaking his leg, I think. And so he was not going to be able to deliver Jeremy because he had a broken leg and he was like in a wheelchair. And I remember one of the last appointments we went to in the doctor's office, for an ultrasound. I went with her because, we're the excited young parents and I want to see the ultrasound and everything. And at that point, we knew the doctor wasn't going to be there, and it was kind of a bummer, but what are you going to do? And so we check in and we sit down, and Linda and I were sitting down in the waiting room, and like a couple seats over, there was a lady, and who I'm assuming was a friend of hers, and they were kind of talking. And this lady, she also was about to give birth, like any moment. I was afraid she was going to go into birth right there in the waiting room because she was like ready. And she starts talking, I'm kind of overhearing her, and she starts talking about how upset she is that the doctor's not going to be there to deliver her baby, and she's furious. And she is like letting out every 4-letter word you can think of. And she's like, this doctor can wheel himself in there because he better deliver this baby. This is ridiculous. And she's going off. And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, I understand the frustration, but I'm like, I don't want him anywhere near my wife when my wife does. This guy's got a broken leg. He's going to drop my kid or something. He's in no shape to deliver this baby. I mean, as much as, yes, he knows my wife and there's a relationship there and an ideal world, yes, but the dude is broken. I mean, if something goes wrong with I don't want a guy with a broken leg and a cast in a wheelchair there to with my wife and son's life on the line. Dude, heal up. You can deliver my next baby. Like, you're not in any shape to do this right now. That's what I'm thinking in my mind. And this is the picture that Jesus is painting. He's saying, look, when you are like this completely broken, jacked up person and you go into someone else's life and try to fix them, that's like a doctor with a broken leg trying to deliver a baby. Just not a good idea. Now, Jesus' whole point, and get this, Jesus is not saying that, hey, once you get to the point of perfection, where you've just nailed it, then you can help someone else out. We're not ever going to be at the point of perfection. None of us are. But again, the point is, unless we can own up to our own stuff, we can never, in a healthy way, approach someone else to try to help them overcome whatever it is in their life. So what Jesus is advocating for is, listen, yes, sometimes we need to have confrontations with each other. Sometimes we need to talk about difficult things. We need to confront things. But we need to make sure we do it with the right attitude and the right posture. And he even goes on to give us the right context. Because here's what he says in the next verse. This is an interesting verse. He says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. And this is a fascinating passage. There's a couple passages in the New Testament where Jesus talks like this, and he uses language that, we understand what he's saying, but it's kind of hard to understand how it would be received in a first century audience. But let's see if we can make sense. The dogs and the pigs, these are kind of quasi derogatory ways of referring to non-Jews, Gentiles. Really, a Gentile in the first century Jewish worldview is anyone who's not a Gentile. And so these are kind of derogatory ways of referring to Gentiles. So what Jesus is doing is he's drawing a distinction between Jews, the people of Israel, who at this time are the people of God, and non-Jews and Gentiles. And Jesus makes it clear throughout his life that he has come really at this point for the Jews. Not to the exclusion of the Gentiles, but for the benefit of the Gentiles. Because if you look at Israel, historic Israel in the Old Testament, Israel was created with this global purpose, to bless the world, to bless the nations. Israel never fulfilled that purpose. Jesus comes along, and Jesus is going to fulfill Israel's destiny. And Jesus, through his own death and resurrection, he's going to fulfill that destiny to bless all nations and to bless all people. So Jesus is going to fulfill Israel. But what he's doing during his lifetime is he's fulfilling the destiny of Israel and calling the people of Israel back together. And then he's going to send them out among the Gentiles. And so really what he's getting at here is he's drawing this distinction, and he's saying, listen, when it comes to confronting one another on lifestyle issues, this is about us within Israel, within the people of God. This isn't about those who are outside. I actually think the Apostle Paul writes it better in 1 Corinthians 5, 12 through 13. Here's how he words it. Paul says, "What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside." See, Paul's saying the same thing here. He's like, listen, when it comes to like confrontation and accountability on matters of morality, that's something that we do within the people of God. We don't do it outside of the community because at that point, you're holding people accountable to a way of life they have never committed to. How can you go outside and like, you're not following the commands of God? Okay, never said I was going to. Now, let me say this and let me make this clear and we'll kind of get to this a little bit more, but I fully understand there are some times when there's like lifestyle choices that people make that are destructive to their health and their well-being. Things like addiction and certain behaviors that are literally like killing people. And so understand that when we talk about confronting people for lifestyle choices, like it's messy. And sometimes there's ways we need to do that is outside the people of God, and we're going to get into that. But what Jesus is specifically referring to is what we would maybe call accountability. It's what we would classify as morality issues. Not just like, hey, this isn't a behavior that's going to kill you or kill your family. This is just a lifestyle choice that is not in line with, the laws, the commands, the teachings of God. What Paul's getting at, what Jesus is saying is, he goes, listen, that's like an internal thing. We do that for one another. Why? Because as those within the people of God, we have made this commitment. We have centered our life, in the case of the church, we've centered our life around the person of Jesus. And we want to live with Jesus as our king, and that's a difficult thing to do. And so sometimes we need to help each other. But it's not our business to hold people outside of the church accountable to living with Jesus as king because they've never made that commitment. So how can you hold someone accountable to something that they haven't committed to? Now, this is where you'll get some people, a lot of people within Christianity who will then push back and say, well, yeah, but we got to be truthful. We got to be truthful. So sometimes people use truth as a means of like justifying their being a jerk. You ever met like jerks for Jesus? You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's just like they're just mean and they're jerky. It's like, well, I'm just speaking truth. I'm just speaking truth. And I get it. Because even if you go back earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus, when he's talking about his movement, when he's talking about the church, he describes the church with these metaphors of salt and light. And he says, you are the salt of the world and you are the light of the earth. Those two metaphors, they talk about like reflecting God's goodness and wisdom into the world and also preserving the world. And so these metaphors do have to do with Jesus understands that his movement, his church, is to have an impact on the community and the world in which they live, even if that world has different values, even if it's hostile. Like, to some extent, the community of the church does influence the larger society. But then the question becomes, well, when does that transfer into judgment? So you want us to have an impact. You want us to live as salt and light, but at what point does salt and light become judgment? How do you manage that? Andy Stanley, who's a pastor in Atlanta, he talks about the difference between problems to solve and tensions to manage. Right? We always want things to be like either or, because it's cleaner. Right? So we always want to solve this of what is salt and light and what is judgment. But the point is, it's not really easy to solve because it's not the same for every situation, which is exactly what Jesus and Paul are saying. That it's not like this fine line between this is salt and light and this is judgment. It takes discernment to figure that out. And it's messy. It's really messy. And so this isn't a problem that we solve, it's a tension that we live in, it's a tension that we manage. And so when it comes to, man, how do we engage in difficult conversations? How do we confront people on destructive behavior? What do we do? There's all kinds of things we have to take into account. Here's some of them. First of all, the relationship. Do I have a relationship with this person? Do I know this person? Am I confronting them out of like love because, hey, we've known each other and we've known each other for a long time? Or is this just some random person on the street that I'm just going to go up to and drop a bomb on and then walk away? What's the relationship? Am I the right person to do this? Or should somebody else do it? What's the setting? Is this me and this person sitting down for coffee and having a conversation? Am I just sending them a text message and dropping a bomb? Is this out in public where I'm just going to light them up? Like, all of that matters. The circumstances, what's going on? Why am I confronting this in this person at this time? Is this like super destructive for some reason? Am I just like really passionate about this right now in this moment? What's going on? What are the outcomes? What is it that I'm hoping for? Why am I confronting this person? Because I see this as one of the evils of society, or because I love this person and I want what's best for them? What do I want to happen as a result of this confrontation? Do I just want this person to admit they're wrong? Do I want to see transformation in their life? What is it that I'm really hoping for? And this one rolls. What role am I willing to play in this? If I'm going to go up to this person and confront them, hey, this issue in your life, this is destructive, this is bad, you shouldn't be doing this. To what extent am I willing to come alongside and help them? Because if I'm not willing to come alongside and help them, I should honestly just keep my mouth shut. And so when you find yourself in a situation where you have someone in your life that's like, hey, I think this needs to be confronted, I think this is an issue that needs to be dealt with, all of these things matter. It's not as simple as like, oh, I'm just going to drop the truth. When John describes Jesus, John is one of Jesus' best friends, one of his closest followers. John uses these two terms. He says grace and truth. And John says Jesus is the fullness of both of these things. He's not either or. He doesn't alternate. He's the fullness of both. And that's messy. See, it's easy to be grace and it's easy to be truth. It's really difficult to be fully both of those things at the same time. And it's messy. And the reason we tend to opt for judgment is because judgment is an easy way to avoid the mess. If I know that your life is broken, and even if I'm worried about you to a certain extent, because I worry what this is going to do to you or to your family, it's way easier for me to drop that on you, tell you what you need to do to fix it, and then walk away. What's really difficult is for me to enter into that and to be a part of that and to help you work through that and to process through that and to be a part of your transformation. That's why we judge, because it's an easy way to solve the problem and avoid the tension and avoid the mess. This is why judgment is an easy solution. It's also typically the religious solution. And we root it in morality and a sense of superiority. It is not, however, the route that Jesus took. Jesus always chose to embrace the mess. And this is what I think, this is how Jesus modeled it for us. When you talk about life in the world, which would be apart from the people of God. When we live our life in a world that is, in our case, it's a secular world. It's a world that in some ways is hostile to the people of God and values of the people of God. How do we live as people of grace and truth? We embody what it means to live with Jesus as King. That's what it means to be a Christian, right? Jesus is the center of our life. We center our life around him. He's our King. So when we go out in the world, we embody what it means to live with Jesus as King. And that impacts every single thing we do. Now, hear me out on this. This doesn't mean that we never talk about Jesus to other people. It doesn't mean that we just, we're nice people and hopefully by being nice, people will want to join the kingdom. No. Because here's my point. If something's important to you, you will talk about it. You talk about your kids. You talk about your sports team. You talk about your cars. You talk about your house. You talk about the things that you value. If Jesus is important to you and you never talk about him, I would question, do you really value him? So it's not that we never talk about Jesus. We don't. If Jesus is important, he's going to come out at some point. It's going to come out. This is why I do what I do, or this is what's important, this is what matters. But what I'm saying is we don't have to go out there and in the first 10 seconds of meeting someone, tell them that they're going to hell and Jesus is the only way out. It means that when we go out, we embody, this is what it means to live with Jesus as King. And this is why we do this, and this is why this matters, and we serve as witnesses, right? Witness is the word that Jesus uses. Bob Goff talked one time, he said that Jesus doesn't need us to be his lawyer. A lot of us we serve as lawyers for Jesus. We're going to argue with other people and just try to convince other people. Jesus never asked us to be a lawyer. Jesus doesn't need a lawyer. He doesn't. What Jesus asked his people to be was witnesses. You know what a witness does? A witness shares from their own experience. A witness shares their story. A witness shares their perspective. Embodying the truth is about being a witness in the world in which we live. This is what we do in the world. Now, within the church, within the people of God, what do? We build one another up. And sometimes building one another up means we confront each other. Sometimes it means we have difficult conversations, but we do so with the sole purpose of encouraging and building each other up. I'm not doing this to tear you down. I'm not doing this to rip you apart. I'm doing this because I love you and I want what's best for you. And guess what? I recognize that I'm not perfect. I recognize that I'm broken. I recognize that I have my own things. So how can we help each other? Because as much as you need me, I need you. And so it's this tension that we live in. And it's not about arguing or criticizing. It's not about judging. It's about living within this tension. And so in the world, we embody it and we live as witnesses. And within the church, we build each other up. And here's what I would say. If you ever find yourself at the point where it's like, man, I really think I need to confront somebody on this thing. I really think I need to confront somebody on this issue. Here's the stuff I would just ask you to think through real quick. Accountability guidelines. And I made them all start with A, so it's super easy. Right? First of all, who's your audience? Is this someone you should be holding accountable? If you're going to confront someone on their behavior and their lifestyle issues, like, is this someone that you have a relationship with? Is this someone that you, like this is within the people of God? Or again, like some of those you have situations where it's okay to confront people outside the faith community because it's like, hey, this is like life or death situation. But ask yourself, like, am I the right person to do this? Is this the person I should be doing this with? Secondly, is your attitude. Like, have you owned up to the log in your own eye before you go helping with them? Or are you going in with this sense of superiority that says, I'm going to fix you? Next, your aim. What's your goal? What are you hoping to get? Do you just want to fix this person? Or do you actually want them to become everything God created them to be? And do you want them to live the thriving life that God created them to live? And the last one, maybe the most important one, is assistance. How are you willing to assist them in whatever your desired outcome is going to be? Because if you're not willing to play a part, you got no business confronting them. If you're just going to drop a bomb and walk away, don't do it. Because you will cause more damage and more hurt, and all you'll be doing is passing judgment. Building each other up says, you know what? I'm willing to enter into this and be a part of it. I'm not your savior. I can't fix you. Only Jesus can fix us. But I'm willing to get into this with you and help be a part of your transformation. See, really, a lot of it, honestly, what it really comes down to is it comes down to us being willing to engage people and recognizing that all the different relationships we have in our life, they're different. And being sensitive to that and being willing to wrestle with, where are we in our relationship? Where are you? Where am I? How do we go? And it requires us to engage in the mess, whether that's out in the world or within the church. But the problem is we live in a very cold society. Think about when the phone rings at your house or someone knocks on your door. You know what we do these days? Why is someone calling me? Why is someone knocking on the door? I'm not expecting anyone. Like, we do that. When we walk through the grocery store, what do? We keep our head down. Don't make eye contact. Just pretend like I'm the only one in here. We just live in a very cold, distrusting society. And so we don't want to engage one another. And so the easy way to avoid engaging is to pass judgment and to move on. The difficult thing to do is to be willing to engage with people where they're at, to enter into the mess. Whether those people are part of the church, outside of the church, near from God, far from God, whatever designation you'd want to put. How can I enter into this person's life, into this person's world, into this person's reality, not to fix them, not to correct them, but to love them and to get to know them for who they are as another human being who's struggling through this life just like I am. And see, one of the things we want to do at FCC is we want to create a community that is exactly that. A community that's willing to engage one another. Doesn't mean we all have to be best friends. Doesn't mean we share our deepest, darkest secrets with each other. But it means we see each other. And we acknowledge each other. And we value each other for who we are as people. And so to that end, I want to do something today that's a little bit different. Most of the time when we end a service, we pray, we sing a song, people get up and boom, they bolt. Go to their car, go to lunch, brunch, whatever you got going on. Go get our kids and take off. But here's what I want you to do. I just want you to try this. Maybe uncomfortable, especially if you're an introvert like me. But when you get up to leave, I'm going to pray in just a second. We're going to be done. I'm not going to sing a song. This is it. When we do, as you're getting up and leaving, I want you to hopefully find someone right around you that maybe you don't know. And here's what I want you to ask them. Tell me something interesting about yourself. Just that. And here's the thing, don't freak out. You don't have to unload your deepest, darkest sin on that person. Like, when I was in 6th grade, I stole from no. Tell them your favorite sports team. Tell them your favorite food. Tell them the city that you grew up in. Tell them a hobby. It doesn't have to be these are just little things that help us get to know each other. Like, oh, that's cool. You're from Cleveland. You're a Yankees fan. You like pizza. It's just these little things that kind of, as simple as those are, you know what they do? They help us to see each other as human beings. Oh, I have a favorite team. So do you. I have a favorite food. So do you. And it's simple. But it's little things like that that help us engage into the mess. So I know you're going to be tempted just to run out. And I'm not saying you have to stay here for 30 minutes and but just as you're walking out, just somebody you don't, hey, tell me something interesting. And let's just start there. Because until we're willing to see each other as people and engage each other as people, we're never going to be able to have the kind of healthy, deep relationships that help us thrive as human beings that Jesus wants us to have. So I'm going to ask you all to stand up right now. Just stand up where you're at. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to technically be done. And I'm not going to stop you. You can run out if you want to. Okay? There's no guilt trip here, but I'm going to encourage you. Tell me something interesting about you. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for your love for us. I thank you that you came down to this earth, and it was for judgment that you came down to this earth. But judgment not because you're angry, not because you're upset, but because of your love and your desire to set right what we have broken. And God, I know that as people, sometimes we opt for judgment. We put ourselves in your place. And sometimes we even do it with the best of intentions. But when we do it, it always brings destruction. And so God, help us to be people who resist that urge to judge, who resist that urge to try to fix people, and instead choose to see people in the midst of their struggles and enter into that. Because that's how we build community. That's how we build relationships. That's how we become the church. Father, help this to be a community that reflects your heart for your world. God, we love you. We thank you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless y'all.